Plantar fasciitis affects 2 million people per year worldwide. If you've ever had plantar fasciitis, you know what it feels like. It feels like somebody's stabbing you with a sharp knife at the bottom of your heel. But here's what's really crazy. The best shoes for somebody suffering from plantar fasciitis aren't always the ones that are recommended by their healthcare provider. Now, the best shoe isn't just a shoe that helps alleviate your pain. It's also a shoe that's going to keep your condition from getting worse. But here's what people miss completely. It's not about finding the best shoe or the right shoe for plantar fasciitis. There's no perfect shoe. What's more important is avoiding the type of shoe that's going to keep you from getting better, and even worse, might make you worse. Hi, I'm Dr. Saller. I'm a board-certified orthopedic foot and ankle surgeon. Every time I'm in clinic, every week, I see a number of patients with plantar fasciitis. And one of the most common questions that I get is, what is the best shoe for somebody suffering from plantar fasciitis? And as I alluded to earlier, the more important question is, what do you really need to avoid if you have plantar fasciitis in a shoe or other types of footwear? In this video, I'm going to talk about 4 common features that you see in 90% of shoes out there that you need to avoid when you have plantar fasciitis. And the third and fourth thing I'm going to talk about may really surprise you, because it's often the opposite of what you might have been told by other people. So the first thing that you absolutely need to avoid in a shoe when you have plantar fasciitis or other types of heel pain is a shoe with a narrow toe box. Now, this is harder than it seems because most shoes have narrow toe boxes. And I'm just not talking about women's high heels or men's dress shoes. Most tennis shoes actually have fairly narrow toe boxes as well. And so if you look at the shape of most shoes, they're shaped like a diamond or an hourglass. The problem is our feet are shaped more like an inverted triangle. So our forefoot is much wider than our heel. So you need a shoe that has a wide toe box that gives those toes plenty of room to work. And the reason is, if you get a shoe with a narrow toe box, what happens is you're squishing your toes together. And when you do that, you're abnormally stretching these intrinsic muscles in a way that they're not intended to be stretched. And it's actually going to lead to weakening of those muscles over time, and they're not going to work as well. And there's even some literature that suggests that it may decrease some of that blood supply to that plantar fascia. Now, if you get a shoe with a wider toe box, it's going to allow those muscles that live just above that plantar fascia behind your toes to work more naturally, and it's going to be much healthier, and you're going to feel much better. So the next thing you want to avoid in a shoe is a shoe that doesn't have good support around the heel. So you want a shoe that's narrow around the heel, that supports the heel and supports your fat pad, which is a natural fatty layer of tissue underneath your heel bone. And what this is going to do is this is going to take load off your plantar fascia and make it easier to walk. Sometimes in the early phases of plantar fasciitis as well, when you're really hurting, getting a shoe with the sole of the shoe that has some cushion or some shock absorbing features to it is often helpful. Now, as you get better, sometimes having a shoe with a heel that is a little bit stiffer can be good as well. So that leads us to the third thing to avoid in a shoe when you have active plantar fasciitis. You don't want a shoe that has a really high heel. So the problem with a lot of shoes, dress shoes in particular, but even athletic shoes, is the heel is often much higher than the front of the foot, often about 10 millimeters or a centimeter higher in the back compared to the front. And what this does is over time, this can actually tighten your calf muscles and lead to the plantar fasciitis getting worse. And it often puts too much pressure over your forefoot and can lead to other issues. So if you have a shoe with a lower heel, what's called a toe drop, 3 millimeters, 5 millimeters, or even 0 drop, this can be better for your foot long term. The zero drop shoes, though, sometimes when you have active plantar fasciitis, can put a little too much stretch on your plantar fascia and be too much. So sometimes that's something that you have to work into over time. And having a shoe with a lower but a positive heel drop, 5 millimeters or 3 millimeters in the beginning, and then you can work your way to a zero drop shoe eventually. So the fourth thing that you want to avoid in a shoe is probably the most controversial and different than what you've been told by friends, family, or other healthcare providers. And that's you want to avoid a shoe with too much arch support. And the problem with too much arch support is a lot like having too high of a heel. So it can be good in the beginning, in those early phases of plantar fasciitis, and it can actually make things feel better. But if you have too much arch support for too long of a time, it makes those intrinsic muscles of your foot lazy and weak and can lead to less capacity to accept greater loads through the plantar fascia. So you want to, over time, as you get better and you get rid of plantar fasciitis, to avoid a shoe that has too much arch support. So that might mean taking out those orthotics in your shoe that you've been using, or just getting a shoe that has a little bit less of an arch support. The other extreme is having a shoe with no arch support, and that would be more of a barefoot style shoe. And that might be great for somebody without plantar fasciitis who wants to strengthen the muscles in their foot. But that also doesn't work for most patients, because now you have too much load going through your plantar fasciitis too quickly, and the plantar fasciitis can get worse or come back. So usually what I found is a shoe somewhere in the middle. And so this is what I call a hybrid shoe. So it's a shoe with a wide toe box. A couple brands that come to mind are Ultra and Topos, although there's other brands that are coming out that do the same thing. And it's a shoe that has decent arch support, that's not overly aggressive, a shoe that has good support around the heel, but has that wide toe box and has a lower heel, 3 millimeter, 5 millimeter, or even a zero drop, which gives you sort of the best of both worlds. So I hope you've gotten a lot of value out of this video. Stay tuned for my next video, in which I'm going to talk about the pros and the cons of using a night splint as a tool to help you get rid of your plantar fasciitis.